We got some breaking news here today out of Los Angeles where we are. A massive federal class action has been filed against the Trump administration, Kristi Noem, Kash Patel, a bunch of different heads of different branches under the Trump administration, alleging wide-scale militarization of immigration agents and sweeping ICE raids and revealing some of the deplorable conditions in which some of these people are being held. It alleges that Latino citizens, day laborers, farm workers were targeted without any warrant, no explanation, no questions. I mean, it's things that we've seen, but this is a massive lawsuit, very well written, and this might be a very important step in trying to seek some justice for these people. We're not talking about racial profiling. We're talking about fraud, government-sponsored kidnappings in broad daylight and shredding the Bill of Rights here in Los Angeles. I'm Shant Karnikian. That's Brian Kabateck. This is Civil Action on the Legal AF Network. Brian, tell us a little bit more about this lawsuit.
Right. So I've got the lawsuit sitting here in front of me, and I'm gonna read from it. I don't think you have to look any further than paragraph 197 of the lawsuit. White House official Ton Homan, who's in charge of ICE, right, recently maligned Los Angeles as a sanctuary city and vowed, quote, "We're going to send a whole boatload of agents. We're going to swamp the city. This operation is not going to end. Every day in LA, we're going to enforce immigration law. I don't care if they like it or not." And then Kristi Noem, when she's not busy trying to kill her dog, said, "We're going to stay here and build our operations until we make sure that we liberate the city of Los Angeles." And then she told ICE agents, "Your performance will be judged every day by how many arrests you, your teammates, and your office are able to effectuate. Failure is not an option." So this lawsuit, Sean, I think we should do this, is go through some of the examples in the lawsuit of the types of conduct that are occurring here in Los Angeles, even as we speak.
Yeah, and I think one thing to lay out before we get into that is that they had an arrest quota of 3,000 arrests per day. That is just wild. You know, judging someone's job performance, a law enforcement official's job performance based on how many people they arrest. So let's talk about some of these most egregious examples that Brian referenced a minute ago. You had one U.S. citizen who was detained and cuffed while walking through a park in Santa Ana, held afterwards, no charges, nothing. That's an American citizen. That's someone that has a United States passport, a citizen of this country. Who else, Brian? You just rattle them off here.
You have a number of people who were detained while they were waiting at a bus stop for work. And the agents pointed a taser at them, said, "Stop or I'll use it." They were pointed guns. They had no warrant. This is very important. They had no warrant. They had no probable cause. They had no reasonable suspicion. All of those are required. They simply found 3 Latino men sitting on a park bench waiting for work, and they declare that that's reasonable suspicion enough to stop and ask them for their papers. There are a number of cases of U.S. citizens who are simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, being forced to identify themselves. There's an example of someone who's a dual citizen with Mexico and the United States, who's repeatedly asked for their identification. They didn't believe it and still took them into custody simply because these people's crime is being brown.
Yeah. You have a young lady here, right here in downtown Los Angeles, who was grabbed while her mother was dropping her off at work. Agents never asked for ID. Her mother described it as what looked like a kidnapping. No questions, not even asking for identification, just kind of really wild stuff. And this is a big, serious lawsuit, I think. You have, you've got another example here. Jason Brian Gavita. These are all public records, so I'm not disclosing anything. On June 12th, he heard someone say immigration agents may be at the premises. This is a U.S. citizen. He saw a federal agent step out, and they were carrying handguns, and some of them had military-style rifles. They pointed at him and said, "Stop right there." They threw him up against a fence. They asked him, quote, "What hospital were you born in?" They asked him the same questions. They pushed him up against a metal-gated fence and twisted his arm. They took the phone from him that he'd been on, repeatedly asking him again what hospital he was born in. He showed him his real ID. That's the ID you're required to carry now if you can get on an airplane, but apparently that's not good enough
for ICE. This makes me incredibly angry. This is a wholesale violation of the United States Constitution, asking somebody for their papers.
Yeah. One of the other things that it reveals is this facility right here in downtown LA called the B18 facility, which is a short-term holding cell area for that immigration officials use, but they've been putting detainees there for extended periods of time. It's underground, windowless, no access. They're not giving people access to lawyers. They're using sleep deprivation and other pressure mechanisms to get people to agree to self-deport. This is just really wild stuff. This is just destroying the Constitution. And this is something that really needs to be pursued.
Well, let's go over again what the rules are here so that people clearly understand them. First of all, nobody can stop you on the street just because. They have to have, at a minimum, at the highest standard is a warrant. Certainly a warrant to enter private places, homes, businesses that aren't open to the public. Probable cause, or at least an articulable, reasonable suspicion.
Yeah.
And like we've said before, in Los Angeles, with almost 50% of the population Latino, it is not an articulable, reasonable suspicion simply because you're Latino. In fact, that is racial profiling. That's exactly racial profiling. But you know, the interesting thing about this, Shant, is that I learned from reading this lawsuit that ICE and immigration here in Southern California this is not their first trip to the courthouse. And it's not been just under the Trump administration. They have been brought in before. There have been orders entered against them for their behavior in the past. Some of those, what we call consent decrees, have ended. They dissolved before Trump became president, but they're back to the same thing that they've been at for a considerable amount of time.
Yeah, what this lawsuit is asking for, the sort of relief that it's seeking, is to stop the raids, declare these practices unconstitutional, enforce federal statutes, and the Constitution, which require reasonable suspicion, lawful arrests, access to counsel, access to someone's lawyer once they're being detained, and establish some degree of oversight and accountability for the Department of Homeland Security and ICE when they come in and operate here. I mean, I think this is an important case. It's not just about immigration. It's about whether the Constitution still applies to federal agents, and whoever decided it doesn't. I mean, this is just wild.
These folks that are being detained, whether they're documented or undocumented, have the right to due process. Due process isn't selective. You don't get to pick due process because someone is or isn't in this country legally. And they're being deprived of their right to counsel. They have a right to counsel. The stories in this lawsuit are incredible, including lawyers being denied access to their clients. And as you said, this basement detention facility, which is supposed to be temporary, has become more permanent, with people sleeping on the floors, inadequate health care, inadequate food, inadequate just warmth, just basic human needs.
Yeah.
And this is, no surprise when, as you said, Stephen Miller, Trump's #1 henchman when it comes to all things immigration, has said he wants 3,000 arrests a day nationally.
Yeah.
When they've made their intent known that they're going to do it whether people like it or not in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
This is just exactly what they think their mission is.
If this is allowed to continue, it sets a precedent that racial profiling, warrantless raids, just taking people, holding them without access to a lawyer, without basic necessities, is acceptable. It's just another tool of the federal government. I mean, it is very dangerous, and this can blow up in everyone's face. This isn't just something that affects, one party or another. It doesn't just affect immigrants or one group of the population. If this is okay now, this can be warped into so many other things that will be used against political opponents. Where do you draw the line? This can harm left and right. This can harm all parties, all levels, all class levels too. So it's very dangerous. And this is a big lawsuit, and they're seeking a lot of important relief that I think is necessary. This clarity and a ruling that this is unconstitutional, I think, is necessary here.
Absolutely. And, my final thought on this is we're sitting here with this big, beautiful bill having passed Congress. And in that bill, and we'll cover this in another episode, but in that bill, there are bonuses, signing bonuses, overtime bonuses, like hundreds of millions of dollars for ICE agents. Yeah. So this administration is not going to stop on its own. And it's only the courts that have the ability and the power to enforce the Constitution. So as usual, Shant, I give you the last thought.
I really want to see how this is going to shake out. When you have federal agents that can grab you off the street, throw you in a van, put you in an underground cell without a lawyer, your citizenship won't even save you. So that's a real problem. That's authoritarian regime, Gestapo type of stuff. And that's dangerous. I think what this lawsuit is trying to fight for is to stop that kind of behavior. And if the courts don't do it here, the courts don't step in to do that, the Constitution is not going to be able to do that in and of itself. The courts need to step in. And I hope the right outcome comes out of this. And we're going to keep following this issue. We'll see how it shakes out. I bet you there's going to be some important things that happen in the coming days with this lawsuit. So stay tuned and subscribe so you can see the updates on this. I'm Shant Karnikian. That's Brian Kabateck. This is Civil Action on the Legal AF Network.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.